I was at a clergy meeting this week that keeps clergy, at a safe place where we can't do too much harm. One of the pastors there was Paul Gilmore. I don't know if you know Paul. He's pastor at Winnetka Pres. He offered a most lovely prayer, apparently without notes. And his prayer was something like this, and I offer this as our prayer today. Lord, lead us where you are leading, and help us not to fear where you are leading. Amen. Amen. I thought that was another way of kind of stating the theme of this class. Where is God leading us? I mean, how open are we? How able are we to unhook ourselves from the fear of something new, something different?
And be aware of our fear.
Oh, gosh, yes, you can't really address it if you're not aware of it. Thank you, therapist Carol. That's very true. So today, I knew that today was going to be jam-packed with material, so I'd rather not push everything in today, because next week we do have some wiggle room. Next week is just what did you think about all this week? So if some of today's material gets pushed into next week, I would rather do it that way than try to cram too much into today. But we'll see where it takes us. So today is more detail on what it would look like for this or any congregation to move in a justice direction in addition to charity, important charity ministries. So here's our ambitious agenda for today, or maybe next week. One more example to get us into the why and the what. Nuts and bolts, we'll spend a lot of time on that today. Like how does this work actually happen? There's a lot behind the scenes that I'm sure you'll be interested in. The very broad topic, which itself could be a multi-Sunday series, separation of church and state and other concerns, and internal dynamics, what gets stirred up within congregations when churches move in the direction of justice ministries. That's a lot, isn't it? It's probably too much. I mentioned at the very beginning of this series that when I was pastor at St. John UCC in Arlington Heights, 2003 to 2014, we heard from our members that both mental illness and housing for people with mental illness was an issue that the congregation could get behind. So a coalition of churches and the housing committee of NAMI, N-A-M-I, the Northwest Suburban chapter of NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness, we got together and worked with a developer to find land and to identify financing for it's called assisted supportive permanent housing, something like that. The idea is people with mental illness, rather than living on the streets or in jail or in their parents' basement, could have their own place. And it's permanent in that there's a lease that can be renewed. It's supportive in that people live with them to help them with meds and appointments and other social things like transportation. And it's affordable. Job placement, whatever. And it's affordable too. They pay like 30% of income. So we thought this would be great for Arlington Heights. The people of Arlington Heights were a little less supportive, especially the people who live next door to the property. Surprise, surprise. So we organized a prayer walk during Lent. Not Lent, there's too many leaves, isn't it? I forget when it was. Summer, maybe? We did a prayer walk on the property. We've got some media. The man to my right is Pastor Tom Sanders. He and the dog from his church, they have a parish dog who lives at the church, went on the prayer walk, and another pastor from First United Methodist Church in Arlington Heights. Other clergy and laity, we went and we prayed over that land. At the end of the day, we were not successful. However, after I left there, hopefully not because I left there, they were successful. And there is now a permanent supportive, affordable housing unit for people with disabilities in Arlington Heights, and it's called Hearts Place.
Hearts.
And this is from their website, what Hearts Place is about, and a picture of it.
It's great that that was accomplished. It's such a huge need.
How did you find the land? I mean,
This is after I left, and it might have been on that same Bossier land. Bossier Place is the name of Willow Street.
mhm.
I don't know.
It's nice looking.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. I have an interior shot. There's an interior shot on the right. That's Cornell West on the left. That's the kitchen unit in one of the units. Kitchen.
How many housing units are there?
18.
Is
And-
it one building or they have other buildings?
One building. There's also one in either Buffalo Grove or Wheeling or Mount Prospect, or maybe it's one in either Buffalo Grove or Wheeling, and then one in Mount Prospect.
Is this the same organization, Hearts Place too there?
I don't know. It's owned by the developer, or it's a private agency. Here's a nice definition of justice from Cornell West to remind us what this is all about. Love in public. Another way to summarize this is what's important to God is important to us. Is there anything that's not important to God? Not just spiritually, but physically. The priest last week, the older priest last week, he made a nice argument that the Christian doctrine of incarnation, God became human, God became flesh in Jesus, says that God is as concerned about the flesh as God is concerned about the spirit. You cannot separate them because Jesus was one. The Christ is physical, the Christ is spiritual. And so if housing people is important to God, then housing people is important to us. And I note here in bold, this didn't happen without opposition, nor did it happen without determined collective action and the support of several houses of worship in Arlington Heights. So what this is all about is bringing people together. One voice can be powerful. Multiple voices is more powerful. Institutional voices are also powerful. And that is the kind of power that can create change in a community. So here are the nuts and bolts. This is generally called faith-based community organizing. This is to note that this just doesn't happen magically. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So the last two churches I've worked with these two organizations. You may have heard of them. Community Renewal Society, which has for the last 175 years or something, been the urban mission ministry of the congregational churches in the Chicago area. So now it's related to the United Church of Christ, and it includes all houses of worship. There are mosques, synagogues, Unitarian churches, Catholic churches that are a part of CRS now. DuPage United is a smaller organization that my church in Lombard worked with. It is not strictly faith-based. It includes some unions, some teachers groups, some PTAs, and so on. Community organizing, when you hear that phrase, and remember that Barack Obama was a community organizer, it typically all comes from the theory and practice suggested by a man named Saul Alinsky. I don't know if that's a new name for you. That is Saul Alinsky, a Chicagoan, who figured out that community change could actually best happen through congregations. Because I don't think he was particularly religious. He might have been, I don't remember that part of the story, but he noticed that churches is where people know each other, people who are not related to each other, who live together in communities, spend time together, and houses of worship all proclaim a moral commitment to the world. It's like, duh, this is like the place to organize people. So he became the father, mother, and grandfather, grandmother of community organizing based on congregational organization. The basic idea of any community organizing, whether it's congregationally based or not, is the more people, the more power and change is possible. We may not have a lot of money, but we have our voice if we show up and follow some of these guidelines. So I'd like you to meet a Christian, a community organizer, my friend, Alex Wiesendanger, who wrote this book. If this church ever wants to pursue this topic in more depth, I recommend that you bring Alex in from New York City. He's now an organizer with the Musicians Union there. And Alex would be glad to talk to you about the things I'm going to just summarize for you. I like to point out that Alex was a child star because it embarrasses him. He was the little Buddha in the Little Buddha with Keanu Reeves. He would say, Jeffrey, don't do that.
So cute.
Here are just some of the ingredients of faith-based community organizing. A lot of education. So we're doing some of that last week and today. You need a leader team. Every successful organization has a leader team. You need to get the support of your church leaders, lay and clergy. The clergy's active involvement and enthusiastic endorsement is very important, as you can imagine. Here, even Pastor Homer is conducting a same-sex wedding here. The things you find on the internet, little pictures, are so fun. And eventually, moving in this direction of justice ministries, you'd want to establish a justice ministry in the church. So in Arlington Heights, the group called themselves Fiat. I would not have chosen that name. They thought it was brilliant. Faith in Action Team. And in Lombard, even before I got there, they had established what they called the Amos Project, which I think is a little more biblical. Amos being a prophet of justice. And the church in Lombard had led them through a process where they actually studied all this and then declared themselves in a congregational vote to be a just peace church, which in the United Church of Christ is the language that can be used for this commitment. More ingredients. Training. Nobody is born a community organizer. This is a new way of thinking about groups, thinking about individuals, thinking about society, thinking about your church, thinking about change. It just doesn't come easily. It's just training all the time and more training. Communicating with the congregation is always important. Let them know what's happening, invite them into the process. There are so many things about community organizing that are applicable to life. One is don't have a meeting just to have a meeting. If you have a meeting, there's got to be a very important reason, a very clear purpose, a limited agenda, a limited time. You start it, you stay on topic, and you finish, and you go home feeling good. You can't wait for the next meeting. I also learned from community organizing, something I use in my ministry at this church and other churches, is the idea of the pre-meeting. Meetings go better when the key leaders in the meeting meet ahead of the meeting and say, this is what we want to do, right? And then you are so on task and the people really feel good about the meeting. They don't feel like the leaders have taken over the meeting. There needs to always be democratic voices in the meeting, but at least there's a sense of energy and purpose. Nobody's saying, what are we talking about? I've also learned in community organizing, when you're organizing, you're not just, and you have an event. It could be an educational event. It could be a rally. It could be a meeting with an elected official. Whatever you're doing, you're not just doing that. Community organizers are looking around and seeing who is there, taking notes in your mind, or even preferably writing them down. Who's in the room? Who's interested enough to come here? It's like, oh, who is that? That's a new person. Who's that? Getting their names, getting their phone numbers or emails.
That's why we have the blue cards in the.
Right. It's just as important in a local church. Don't let visitors come to your building without having some kind of conversation with them, ideally, getting their data. Also, in community organizing, you're looking for leaders. Like, who spoke up? Who was paying attention to the logistics? Who can sing? Some of these events have music, right? Who can sing? Who can provide treats? Who can do these things? So yes, there's a meeting going on, but you're actually looking for leaders all the time. Look for leaders, look for leaders, look for leaders. Look for who knows whom, because this person over here may have an interest in mental illness. You know that this person has an interest in mental illness, introduce them. So I've learned that in community organizing, and then stay focused, stay focused, stay focused. Saul Alinsky taught that what makes the world change is relationships. It's not ideas, it's not events. It's our respect for, love for, connection with other people. And that's true among people who are concerned about a particular issue, but it's also true with the people that you're going to be bringing in, and also the people that you're going to go to and ask for change. You're building a personal relationship with them all the time.
May I add?
Mm-hmm. Please.
I saw a video a couple of weeks ago about a fellow who wrote a fascinating book on environmental changes in environment. And one of the things he talked about that I thought was really interesting, and I think relates to this, is that there's a tremendous amount of influence that other people can have. If you do this, then maybe you do what he does. And if you and you and you do
Right.
the same thing, then you get 6 people doing the same thing.
So leaders in community organizing is defined as, you're a leader if you have someone who follows you. What does that mean? It means if I can get my neighbor to come to the meeting, I'm a leader.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm the chairperson or treasurer or whatever or something. I'm a leader if I have a following. And maybe I just have a following of my neighbor. But and so the idea, Alinsky's idea is, I won't go to a meeting or a rally or whatever necessarily because I'm interested in the topic. But if my friend
Right.
says, let's go, I'll pick you up, then it becomes kind of peer pressure, but also, let's look at it more positively,
I think
a fun opportunity to be with my friend and do something.
I think it's both. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is I think it's the relationship to begin with, but then even though if I don't know you, you see me doing something that kind of touches you,
Right.
then you're likely to do it.
Yep. So it's amplified. My interest is amplified when I see it in someone else. Yeah. Okay. So the key tactic in community organizing, according to Alinsky, is the one-on-one. It's what it sounds like. But one-on-ones need people who are trained. A one-on-one isn't just a conversation about anything for an hour and a half. A one-on-one is a specific opportunity to get to know another person, for them to get to know you. But what you're seeking is shared self-interest. I don't know if I actually have the phrase self-interest here or not. Self-interest is another key concept in community organizing. It sounds like selfish interest. It's not. Self-interest is something that interests you. There needs to be a different term for it. It's called self-interest.
When you find somebody, you run into somebody for the first time and discover they've got a shared important goal in their lives. I've got something important in common with them. I'm going to stick with them because, you know, the two of us can affect more change.
So going back to the example of mental illness, I found in both of these congregations that mental illness is something that almost everybody can get behind in a local church. Why? Because everybody has a relative, a friend, or they themselves in their families, or they themselves have had occurrences of mental illness. And that becomes a self-interest, not because my concern is the only concern. It's because that's the concern that will get me to a meeting, to do something about it. It's a passion. Is passion a better word? Perhaps. So here's how it works. Reports from one-on-one. go to the leader team and are used to. So you discover through one-on-ones what church members think needs to be done in the community and what they really have the passion, the inner drive based on their self-interest to do, not to talk about, to actually do. Here are some examples. These are just examples. I made them up. Better recycling or composting, LGBTQ affirming schools, affordable housing. There's a lot of examples. And notice that these aren't necessarily regional, state, national, global. They might be. The idea of community organizing is really community first. Now, when it comes to greenhouse emissions, the global is local, the local is global, right? So these things often come together. And if you want to make a change locally, you may have to have a change at the state level too. It depends on what the issue is, but the important thing is to identify shared interests in an issue. Here's another concept that's important in community organizing is distinguishing between problem and issue. World hunger is a problem. I want to alleviate world hunger. Can you break that down a little bit? So community organizing uses the language. This is all in Alex's book, by the way. Send it around.
That's here.
Oh, there it is. Good. The idea is taking just one piece, one doable, winnable piece of world hunger. And it might be your own local food bank, or you don't have a food bank. You need to start one. Or no one in the community wants a food bank because people will be hanging around there and we don't want those kinds of people, whatever. So we had people in Lombard who did not like the fact that we had a social service agency on our campus because people would line up outside the building.
We had a situation like that here in Winnetka when I was on the library board. I also was a member of the plan commission in the village here. And one of the plans was to create housing in a building that would house people who didn't have quite the income that Winnetka people do. And
Like
there
the
was
police and the teachers.
yeah. And but it was going to be the housemaids and the cleaning ladies and all that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of objection to that in that meeting. So
Right.
the plan committee recommended to the board that they adopt the program and permit that building to be built. And it happened. But boy, there was a fair amount of noise in that, in that meeting. And you know what? One thing that bothered me was the guy who was pastor of this church at that time, who will be unnamed, came in there. He just sat there. He didn't say a thing. He didn't do anything. He just sat there. And of course, that didn't mean a thing. But
Take a look at this quote by Alinsky. And remember the life of Jesus too. I'm going to share that with folks in the back here. This is the book where these ideas come from. Community organizing is not for sissies. This can get contentious. That's when churches start to say, I don't know about this.
That's why you have to confront your fear.
Exactly. Yeah, so this is called, in community organizing, this is called cutting an issue. Cutting an issue, you want to really narrow it down. Narrow down the problem to an issue that is winnable, doable, understandable, narrow, very specific. The congregation needs to decide what it wants to do. Here are some more crazy examples. In DuPage County, we worked with the county sheriff and local municipal police departments to do more training in what was called CIT, crisis intervention teams, so that when police roll up on a scene that involves a suspect with mental illness, they are trained to employ a wide range of tactics with that person other than force and arrest, right? And we got pushback from the police departments. Some police departments said, yes, where do we sign up? It's called CIT, Crisis Intervention Teams. Affordable housing, we've talked about. One church I know worked with their local hospital to increase the number of ASL interpreters, American Sign Language. Who has the power to make meaningful change relative to this issue? That's the next question you asked. Who can make change here? It could be all kinds of people. A bank, town council, a school board, a utility, any level of government. So you want to identify, it's called identify a target. And then you start building a campaign based on relationships, first relationships within your group, and also professional relationships with your targets. Professional relationships means you're not trying to be their friends because they're probably not wanting to be your friends either. You are visiting them as citizens and as people of faith, not buddies. And so you need to maintain that healthy boundary with your targets because they would love to get you on their side and make you think that they're your friends, to kind of manipulate you into their way of thinking. And by the time you go into a meeting with them wanting to do this, you walk out with their agenda in your hand. I don't mean to say that elected officials can be slippery. One of the little things you learn is there are no permanent friends. There are also no permanent enemies, meaning you don't burn bridges with anybody in the movement. And that includes people that you're working with. You have a disagreement about a tactic. Don't say, well, I can never work with you. Because 2 years from now, you're going to have to work with that person. So you build professional relationships.
It's good to get along with people.
Yes,
Yeah.
even when you can't.
Everybody is different.
Yeah.
And they're nice, and you be friendly, you be their friend. There's nothing wrong with that.
So the elected official that is your helper today, who's on your side, will be someone that you need to put some pressure on 2 or 3 years from now. So it works both ways. And this is an important point too. Alinsky and others always said, when one congregation can do something, that's great. When one congregation can join with another congregation, it's even better. You're building power, building power. So CRS, Community Renewal Society, and DuPage United were all organizations of organizations coming together. One congregation's interests are going to be a little different than another congregation's interests, right? So you try to find what's overlapping and what still has energy and work together to build more change. Tell your target. So when you sit down with your target, you need to tell them from your heart, from your own viewpoint, personal viewpoint, why this is important to you. You may have a story to tell, a faith commitment to witness to, personal values. What are the values of your faith community? And you might even think about it from their point of view. How will this help them? I mean, you want to bring out all the nails you have in your nail pouch and try to build relationship and be persuasive. And you want to be clear and firm about what you want. And by that, I mean, I've met with a lot of elected officials and they will try to digress.
Really?
They will want to take you any place but where you want to go with them that day. So you've got a half hour or whatever you've got with them. They'll start talking about all kinds of things. I mean, you've got to bring them back. You say, well, that's very interesting, but they'll want to sometimes talk about the politics behind, like, well, we could do this, but the Democrats won't, but like, come back. So you need to just say, really focused. Remember, it's your meeting. It's not their meeting. They work for you. And it's your meeting. Don't let them take over your agenda. And if you're there to ask their support about something, ask them and then be quiet. Like, Representative so-and-so, will you support House Bill, blah, 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 blah.
a good point. And realizing where they're coming from, because they get hundreds of people just like you every day walking in their
Right.
door. And everyone's got their own.
Right. But if you're not walking in their door with your point of view,
Never get hurt.
it'll never get hurt.
Right, that's right.
But you don't want to say, you don't want to just keep talking out of nervousness. You want to be quiet and let them squirm, think, formulate a response, right? If they say no, if they say yes, great. Take it another step if they say yes and say, will you be a co-sponsor? Will you talk to Representative so-and-so because they need some talking to? If they say no, ask them why. And then ask them, what would it take for you to change your mind? If they say, I'm going to have my staff look at this. So, oh, well, that's understandable. When can we get back with you? Does this sound a little pushy?
Perseverance.
Or is it, is it? Saul Alinsky called this agitation. Staying, keeping your eye on the ball, staying focused. Set up a follow-up meeting, make them uncomfortable. That's what Jesus did. That doesn't mean you're rude. That will get you nowhere, right? So Ephesians says, speak the truth in love. It's some of the wisest words in the Bible. But love doesn't mean nice all the time. Love, like with your children, the tough love, I'm going to speak frankly with you because I do love you. You can employ that with people in the movement and your targets both.
But God loves us unconditionally.
Indeed. This is that big topic, separation of church and state. And I know, and I've heard from some of you that this is important to you in this regard. So it's important to me. And I think the questions here might be, is this allowed? I mean this from more of a legal constitutional perspective. Is this wise? That's another kind of question. And maybe the third question here is related more to the first. Will we lose our tax exempt status? These are questions that come up. So
What does, I think everybody who is in this room knows, well, yes, we are a country that has separation of church and state, but what exactly does that mean?
read the First Amendment for a moment. There's a lot in that sentence. Courts and legislatures continue to struggle. What does this mean in so many different cases? So this is Jeffrey speaking here. And I think if this is important to you and you'd like to have a real expert come and talk to you, I think that'd be very fruitful.
Is this more similar to the freedom of religion?
Yeah.
That
Questions of freedom of religion, which I think is the real question here, not separation of church and state.
There's one little
So-
sentence here, it's speech, it's assembly, it's religion.
And there's two parts. There's two parts to the First Amendment's reference to religion here. So this is Jeffrey speaking. No court case I am aware of has ever found that the First Amendment forbids religious institutions from promoting their values in the public square. Does anyone know of any such decision by the Supreme Court? Or I'm sure there may have been some lower courts over the centuries.
Maybe in the Jim Crow era.
well, they're doing that with the Ukrainians. They teach them about Christian. They say they have Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and they are going by, singing with them, praying with them,
Mm-hmm.
allowing the Pope to go see them. He said he was going to go visit Ukraine.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope he's got his bulletproof vest on. That's a good point, Verna. Different countries have different jurisprudence on this issue, right? So this is particular to the United States, and we're still trying to parse this out in many cases involving public schools, for example.
They're getting
But-
housing and
But to
stuff like that.
so to the best of my knowledge, I don't think at the Supreme Court certainly has never said that because of the First Amendment, for some reason, that faith communities could not speak and act in the public sphere.
If you want a silly little aside, it's something you can't forget from law school. it has to get pretty out there for, the government to want to do anything like that. A long time ago, some people, a South American indigenous religious practice, which part of their religious rite was to take peyote and some
Right.
other.
It was Native American.
That's right, it's the US.
US,
Here in the Supreme Court said, all right, that's where we're gonna draw the line, because you have freedom to assemble, and these are your religious practices, fine, but these are illegal drugs that might have real, social detriment to them.
So there are a lot of cases like that,
That was an old case.
but this is, I know of no government effort to stop churches, synagogues, and mosques from speaking about social issues.
No.
There is one issue that still is going on in the United States, and that is the states do have rights to help the public schools, but some states are also providing help to the religious schools.
Right,
Voucher.
through vouchers and so on.
Yeah, right. Is that legal? Is it legal?
So again, lots of cases like that, but that's not asking, can the government limit the speech of congregations, ministers?
Religious
It's
institution.
anything to do with,
Yeah.
tax exemption. This is
Well,
First Amendment. That's
We're going to get to the tax exemption question. So my second sentence there is, in fact, that would be a violation of the First Amendment's free exercise and free speech clauses. So there are two parts of the First Amendment that regard religion. One is, take a look at it. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. It's called the Establishment Clause. That means in the United States of America, there must never be a state religion. But allowing a church, synagogue, or mosque to speak into the public square is not the establishment of a religion. It's freedom of speech. Now, again, you need a real expert to say, but there's this case over here and there's this case over
Yeah,
here.
they had that.
So I'm giving you what I can give you. The other part is called the free exercise clause. And that is every religious institution is guaranteed in the First Amendment the freedom to exercise. Institutions and individuals are given the freedom to exercise their religion.
So that would be the action.
And you can say that the free exercise clause, when a local church says it's our job to speak into the public sphere in matters of civil rights, for example, and we are exercising our religion when we do that. So I think that's a basis for churches, synagogues, mosques, clergy to speak into the public square. Lastly, religious institutions do this all the time. Imagine the Supreme Court said tomorrow, the Pope or his bishops in the United States, Winnetka Congregational Church, any church, you must never again speak your mind about
Housing.
homelessness, housing, whatever.
Or anything.
Right?
They had that on the news too. The mom.
Now, this picture in the lower left-hand corner is from Australia, but so it doesn't really apply. But it could be a picture from anywhere, right? People of faith saying killing our planet is against our religion. That's speaking into the public sphere as a faith community. So again, what I think the First Amendment forbids is the establishment of a state religion. Advocating for religious values in public policy is not the establishing of a state religion. By the way, a few years ago here at WCC, we studied Laudato Si, the current Pope's statement about climate change, and his call for governments, businesses, individuals, churches to take action to save the planet. To say that churches should not do this would be so contrary to what's happening all the time, including, I remember as a kid, Pope Paul VI irked President Johnson to no end by declaring the bombing, indiscriminate bombing of North Vietnam to be evil. You know, imagine Lyndon Johnson in the White House hearing Pope Paul VI in Rome saying this. And as a kid, I thought, that's awful. That's awesome, that he's able to do that.
So Jeffrey,
Mhm.
the expression extends to action.
Yes, I'm aware of no
You're
court
considering
case,
it-
right, speech, action, right, I'm aware of no court case that has forbidden a church synagogue from speaking to members of the General Assembly, Congress, town councils, or protesting or boycotting.
But I see that as still speech, but then
Yeah.
taking that one step farther to take action and do something specific, building a home,
Right.
or, active, working
How-
with the government.
How can that be against the First Amendment?
Right, well,
Right.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking, but
Right.
I'm thinking that some people might separate the two, say, oh, we can talk about it. but
We can
don't
talk
have
about
to
it,
do
but we can't
anything.
do anything.
The word speech
Hmm.
of the Constitution, speech means doing as well as action.
Okay.
Okay, but when they say
Okay, the
establishment,
attorney has
is that
spoken.
the building? When they say establishment, that's the building, right?
No, an establishment means creating, making a religion.
Oh.
Yeah, the state religion. So people say, what about the separation of church and state? The phrase does not occur in the Constitution. The phrase, the wall of separation of church and state, was written by Thomas Jefferson in a letter to Baptists. And to Baptists, Danbury Baptists, wherever that was, Virginia probably. And that it just does not appear in the Constitution. And I've always thought that separation of church and state, to the extent that it is a legal doctrine or whatever, if am I using the right terminology? Probably not.
Mhm.
It's really meant to protect religion from the state, not the state from the religion. Just almost 2 years ago, when George Floyd was murdered, people in Winnetka gathered at the Green. The internet says that's an actual picture from that day. Okay, let's talk about tax exemption. Everybody's favorite topic in April, right? Remember that fellow? Before he was vice president and president, he was a very influential US senator from the state of Texas. And there was a labor union or something that was opposing him, and they had tax exemption. And he said, I'll get them. I'm going to have the whole US Congress and President Eisenhower sign and pass, let's call it the Johnson Amendment. I don't know if he called it that, but it was named after him. It, for the first time in 1954, established in the IRS code, not by IRS administrators, but by Congress. The idea that tax exempt organizations, 501c3 organizations, are free to speak and act and say anything and do anything, including advocating for or against candidates and parties. Johnson said, well, we don't want to stop them from speaking their mind about the issues, but what we can do is grant them tax exempt status in exchange for some limits.
That's the game he played.
And the limits were, you cannot speak, a local church or its pastor functioning as a representative of the institution cannot speak for or against candidates, for or against parties. That's the Johnson Amendment. That's why today, any 401c3, not just churches, any 401c3 cannot advocate for or against parties or candidates. They can, but they can the IRS can come after us. So
It's kind of slippery, isn't it?
it's, so the Johnson Amendment has not been very well enforced, because you can imagine how hard that would be. So a pastor says something right up in a sermon, say a pastor says something right up to vote straight Republican, but doesn't say that quite. Does the IRS come after them or not? And do we want a government that comes after churches? So there have been a few cases where the Johnson Amendment has been enforced, but not very many. Here's the specifics of the Johnson Amendment. Forbids 501c3s from endorsing or opposing political candidates and parties. Very clear, right? It also forbids lobbying beyond what's called an insubstantial percentage of the organization's activities. I found a website yesterday that details that. It depends on your budget, but generally speaking, it's about 20% of your activities. I know of no church that spends 20% of its activities on lobbying, even churches that do get involved in going to see state reps or.
But there are 501(c)(3)s that spend 100%.
Schools, universities, not-for-profits,
Right.
churches, they don't pay certain
So
taxes.
if they're 501(c)(3)s, they must follow this law.
Right,
They may not be 501(c)(3)s. A private school may not be a 501(c)(3). I don't know. We need a real professional here about this.
How about Billy Graham and all the churches that have big agendas? How does that fit? Does that get tested at all?
Everything's okay as long as they don't say vote for or against
I see.
a candidate or party, or spend more than 20% of their activities in lobbying. Lobbying is also strictly defined by the IRS. It does not forbid things like candidate forums. And I have a paper here from the ACLU. I'll pass it around. The ACLU paper here helps us understand what that means. So if a church wants to have a candidate forum, but only invites its favorite candidate, that's a violation. If it invites all the candidates, that is not a violation. If it invites all the candidates, but only one comes, it is still not a violation because all candidates were invited. You really get very specific here. So candidate forums, appearances by an elected official like we had 2 weeks ago, voter registration drives, and supporting or opposing referenda. These things are all allowed by the Johnson Amendment.
The Trump administration, there were so many of the religious, conservative religious
Right.
leaders that were really supporting him wholeheartedly
Yes, and so this is a very interesting
in
point.
raising money for him.
Some religious conservatives believe that it is their God-given duty to speak for and against candidates and parties. So they are directly challenging the Johnson Amendment by flaunting it and saying, IRS, come get me. President Trump said, and you can look it up on the internet, said he will destroy the Johnson Amendment. That would have required an act of Congress, which for any president is very difficult. So Johnson Amendment is still in place, still the law. But there are some churches saying, you will not silence me. You will not silence us. You will not silence God, the Bible, and so on. So one of the religious right people during one of the Bush, it was Jerry Falwell,
Oh, yeah.
who's long gone now. He was quoted as saying, you may vote for the Bush of your choice.
I'm just squirming. My sister belongs to a church where this church owns tons of property in Santa Monica, California. I mean, and then they house all their people that they're trying to get to be members of the church. All the immigrants who come into California get to have low-cost housing. Except then they solicit the members to be a part of this real estate trust, like my sister, so that people's money go into the housing.
Mhm.
I don't know. I see a lot of conflict there.
Yeah.
I don't hear, what you described, I don't hear a violation of
I
the
know.
Johnson Amendment.
But really,
The Johnson Amendment also
they're
allows,
building an empire.
the Johnson Amendment also allows the production of voter guides by local churches, which when you pick them up, it's very clear who they want you to vote for, but it doesn't say vote for this candidate. So a church that is against abortion, for example, will produce a voter guide and say, what the candidates say about this god-awful, illegal, or the against God practice. And then you open it up and there's a happy face of the anti-abortion candidate. And then there's a scowling face of the pro-choice candidate.
Across a
Right.
face, right?
I mean, you'd be an idiot not to know who this church wants to vote for, who wants you to vote for, but because they don't use the magic words, vote for, vote against. It's very slippery, right?
We need an amendment.
We need a clearer amendment.
One of the reasons why we joined the church way back is that there were study groups or task forces that then led the church forward, such as the being part of helping men who did not want to go to Vietnam to get to Canada. Of course, this task force on reproductive rights. But the small groups studied all kinds of ways and then brought the recommendation forward, and we sort of had a process moving it onward.
Yeah, I remember you told me that once, Marcy, and I think you even told me that it was your memory that this church made a statement on reproductive rights.
Yes, and joined the reproductive rights. Oh dear, I can't remember the name of the national organization.
Yeah, it's a religious coalition for reproductive
Thank
rights.
you. Yeah.
Oh, and Benevolence. Benevolence was a huge supporter of Planned Parenthood when I joined Benevolence. Huge supporter of Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
So these are all ways of speaking and acting into the public square.
But does that news, Marcy, get back out into Winnetka? Do other people know what we're doing? Does that particular statement that the church made regarding Canada get out into the newspaper? Did it get out to the Winnetka community? Did it get into the Chicago Tribune?
I don't know that it made it to the Chicago Tribune, but it was certainly known in Winnetka.
And I think this can be really valuable because sometimes churches speak as if they're speaking for all of Christendom,
That's surprising.
when in fact they're speaking for their particular piece of Christendom, right? So Catholics
Jerry
do.
Falwell.
Exactly. Evangelical right does not speak for the entire church. Neither does the Roman Catholic Church speak for the entire church. Neither does the more liberal, progressive Protestant movement speak for the whole church. We speak from our own unique perspective. We should just acknowledge that in fairness.
It's a personal thing too. I mean,
Yeah.
how many kids didn't want to go to Vietnam and had good reason? Maybe.